On a stage where courage was his sharpest weapon and each adversary a stepping stone to legend, the unwavering Chuck Norris fought battles that transcended common understanding. But the final fight, the one that would redefine his legacy, would not find its place in a dusty dojo or on a crime-ridden city street. This would be a war waged in silence, in the hallways of a hospital, for the greatest of all trophies, love. For the idol of several generations, ironically revived by the pop culture of the millennium, the mythical figure who faced Soviets, Viet Cong, the Mafia, Nazis, police corruption and even terrorists of different nationalities, the enemy was now invisible, microscopic, but devastatingly real. Since 2013, the adversary that the great Chuck Norris had to face was a name almost unknown to the general public: gadolinium. This chemical element, often used in contrast materials during magnetic resonance imaging, became, according to the actor, the root of his wife's suffering. His beloved Gina O'Kelly, born in California in 1963, an actress and model, found herself suffering from an illness that led her husband to make a drastic but deeply human decision. To take care of her in combat what he classified as medical negligence, Chuck Norris, almost 80 years old, announced a pause in his cinematic journey of more than 4 decades. The story of Chuck Norris, who so many have followed in his exploits on the big screen, as in McQuaid, the Lone Wolf, reminds us that behind the myth lies a deep humanity. If you feel inspired by this devotion, and want more people to know the nuances of this journey, consider showing your support so that this message reaches an even wider audience. The decision was a cry of love and a testament to priorities. I abandoned my film career to dedicate my entire life to keeping Gina alive. That's the most important thing, that she stays with us and that what happened to her is not suffered by anyone else, declared the star, according to the text that explores his trajectory. These words echo with a sincerity that transcends the image of the invincible action hero, the one who in Braddock, the super commando he seemed capable of any feat, emphasizing that, for Chuck, the greatest feat is his dedication to his family. Gina and Chuck, who married in 1998, are parents to 18-year-old twin sons, joining the 3 children Norris had from his first marriage to Diane Holchek, born in 1941. The life of Carlos Ray Norris, his birth name, is a script in itself, full of twists and turns and transformations. Before becoming the Chuck we know, he was a dedicated family man, taking care of his mother and siblings, facing challenges long before any movie script. His first major turning point came with his enlistment in the Air Force, a chapter that took him to Korea as a military policeman, long before he played Texas Ranger Cordell Walker in Chuck Norris, the Lawman. There, far from the Hollywood spotlight, he discovered the art that would shape his destiny, Tangsudo, a Korean version of Taekwondo. Back from Korea, he carried not only a new nickname, Chuck, but the promise of a future as a martial arts instructor, setting the stage for the legend to come. What few people know is that Chuck Norris is not content to follow already established paths. He builds roads. Combining his knowledge of Taekwondo, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, wrestling, Muay Thai and Shotokan, he created the Chankuk-do, a martial art as unique as he was, and which was another one of his inventions. And the innovations didn't stop there. Imagine the master, tired of seeing his pants rip with every flying kick, a problem that, he joked, who hasn't had? Deciding to create the Chuck Norris action pants. These pants, which today may seem like simple stretch jeans without much style, were, at the time, a functional revolution, and who would dare discuss fashion with the man who, legend has it, taught Paime the 5 pressure points to make a heart explode? Chuck's trajectory is a rich tapestry, where the fiction of his films, like U.S.A. Invasion, intertwines with the reality of a man who, despite being a global icon, chose to put the love and health of his wife above any professional recognition. The path to fame in Hollywood was not paved by itself. It was built with sweat and sacrifice, and had a decisive push from figures who would become legendary. Steve McQueen, one of the most influential and admired figures in 1970s Hollywood, and who happened to be one of Chuck's students, played a crucial role in this journey. The martial arts academies that Norris had founded in Los Angeles were on the verge of bankruptcy, waiting for a masterstroke, and it was in this moment of fragility that McQueen uttered the phrase that would change his master's destiny. "If you can do nothing else in life, there's always acting," said McQueen, a maxim that, due to its simplicity and depth, could easily be the motto of any artistic training institute, such as that of the renowned Lee Strasberg. This phrase opened up a new dimension for the man who, until then, had been known for his combat prowess, not for his dramatic abilities. Interestingly, McQueen also had a stroke of fate that saved him from tragedy when he canceled at the last minute a dinner at Sharon Tate's house on August 9, 1969, narrowly escaping the atrocities committed by Charles Manson's followers. The second major turning point in Chuck Norris' career came in 1972, through another luminary of the time, the legendary Bruce Lee. Lee, recognizing Norris' talent and intensity, offered him the role of antagonist in his iconic film, The Flight of the Dragon. The confrontation between the two, a fight that lasted for more than 10 minutes in the Grand Colosseum in Rome, became an inevitable landmark for martial arts aficionados. Chuck, wondering who would win the battle, knew the answer perfectly well. Bruce Lee was the director, screenwriter, protagonist, and the greatest star in martial arts cinema. Victory would be his. For the first and last time in his career, Chuck Norris would accept the role of villain, and for the first and last time, he would eat dust on screen. However, this did not bother him, because he was fully aware of the aura of his rival, who was also one of his best friends. This relationship of mutual respect and deep friendship would be sadly confirmed a few months later, when Chuck and Steve McQueen would be in charge of carrying Bruce Lee's coffin in a church in Seattle. The post-period The Flight of the Dragon marked Chuck Norris' definitive rise to action stardom. Thanks to a handful of memorable characters, his name has been etched in the memory of millions. He was the ruthless J.J. McQuaid in the classic McQuaid, the Lone Wolf, the fearless Colonel James Braddock in Braddock, the Super Commando, a film that, interestingly enough, was released as the second part of a trilogy, even though it was filmed at the same time as the others to reduce production costs. The list continues with the brave Mad Hunter Inu.S.A. Invasion, and culminates in what would become his most iconic role, the invincible Texas Ranger Cordell Walker in the series Chuck Norris, The Lawman, which captivated audiences from 1993 to 2001. His sometimes scowling but always unshakable efficiency filled thousands of VHS tapes, solidifying his image as the lone vigilante, an archetype that his great hero, John Wayne, had masterfully represented in Western cinema. Norris's meteoric rise was fueled in large part by the wave of heightened patriotism that President Ronald Reagan had fueled in the 1980s. After a decade marked by the pacifism of Jimmy Carter's leadership and the hippie movement, Cold War fears were resurfacing in American homes, where the possibility of a Soviet invasion via the Bering Strait was beginning to seem real. It was time for heroes to step forward, and Chuck, with his reputation for taking on armies of communists, was the perfect embodiment of that national need. Not only Reagan, but also savvy businessmen like Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus, the Israeli-born cousins behind the iconic production company Cannon Films, played a key role in paving the way for Norris's runaway success. Cannon, famous for stocking the shelves of local video stores with its action films, operated under a simple and straightforward business maxim: if you make American movies with a beginning, middle, and end and a budget of less than $5 million, you have to be an idiot to lose money. And they were demonstrably not idiots. In his first project for Cannon, Norris was able to witness his cousin's monumental disregard for narrative coherence. The film, which was released as Braddock, the Super Commando, 1984, was actually the second part of a trilogy, but to cut costs, all the films were shot simultaneously. Since the producers considered this film the most interesting, they decided to release it first. Narrative coherence? Who cared about that, if Chuck was able to defeat a rat with his teeth, in a scene that defied all logic, but entertained the audience? These films, which often had budgets as limited as their scripts, paradoxically helped to forge an unparalleled mystique around the figure of Norris. He perfectly represented the archetype of the lone vigilante, a man of few words but decisive action, a character who, like John Wayne, would become synonymous with heroism in the popular imagination. Norris's rise, fueled by Reaganite patriotism, established him as a beacon of strength and determination. It was undeniable that this was the ideal time for heroes who were not afraid to step forward, and Chuck, with his ability to face an army of communists head-on, literally, in many of his fight scenes, was the ideal figure to personify this new era. However, Norris's patriotic intentions did not always captivate critics and discerning audiences alike. In 2011, he was named the worst actor of the last 25 years by the influential website Rotten Tomatoes, a title that, according to the article itself, was more a reflection of the poor quality of his films than of his ability as an actor. But what did the critics' opinions matter when you were an exponent in the fight against communism, both on and off the screen? Chuck's transcendence went far beyond the movie theaters, as an entire generation of Romanians can attest, who found in him a symbol of resistance. In On Link to Caligarianu's documentary, Chuck Norris vs. Communism, we discovered one of those true stories that surpasses the most complex scripts. In the 1980s, in Romania controlled by the Ceausescus, there was only one television channel, which only broadcast programs and films after strict approval or cuts from the government. In this environment of censorship and control, a thriving parallel video market emerged, where, on clandestine cassettes, the thrilling adventures of heroes like Norris, Stallone, and Van Damme circulated. More than mere entertainment, these films became a window into a world that seemed unattainable. These fearless characters, who unhesitatingly fought the oppressive ideology that kept Romanians on a short leash, also opened their eyes to a reality where freedom manifested itself in previously unimaginable consumer goods, such as shiny Ford Mustangs, refreshing Coors beer, and the promise of sunny vacations on Venice Beach. For many, the screen was a portal to hope, a glimpse of what could be. Norris' influence, however, was not limited to fighting communism in his cinematic narratives. His political stance, solidly aligned with the most extreme right of the U.S. government, was always explicit and uncompromising. He did not hesitate to directly oppose any hint of what he perceived as progressivism, transforming his voice into a pillar for American conservatism. Interestingly, the Chankuk Do, the martial art developed by Norris, is based on a set of very high principles and full of good intentions. He preached, for example, that if I have nothing good to say about a person, I will say nothing, and that I will dedicate so much time to improving myself that I will have no time to criticize others, in addition to emphasizing respect for authorities. However, in practice, the six-time world karate champion did not shy away from launching fierce and scathing criticisms against the very authorities that, in theory, he should respect. A striking example of his critical verve came to light during then-President Barack Obama's re-election campaign. In his weekly column on the website WorldNet Daily, Norris provocatively asked, "What if the Virgin Mary had depended on Obama's health coverage?" And, without mincing words, he went on to raise the tone on his digital platform, "Will Obama's care become Herod's care for newborns?" In his writings, he also called for mandatory prayer in schools, an issue dear to the conservative base. Norris's political intransigence extended to other social issues. Even a Republican war hero like then-Senator John McCain had to endure Norris's scorn for supporting marriage equality, an issue that Chuck, unsurprisingly, was vehemently opposed to. For him, certain principles were non-negotiable, and his position was always clear and unwavering, regardless of who was on the other side of the issue. Naturally, Hillary Clinton also found no room for his approval. Like other names who opposed Hollywood's growing tilt towards the Democrats, Norris, along with figures such as Jon Voight and Charlie Sheen, preferred to use his influence to campaign for Donald Trump. It was a choice that, for many, made perfect sense. After all, few Americans could be as obsessed with the idea of a wall on the border with Mexico as the man who, for 9 seasons, patrolled Texas in a series that immortalized him, Chuck Norris, the lawman. This iconic role as the Texas Ranger not only cemented his popularity throughout the 1990s and 2000s, but also prepared him for a whole new cultural phenomenon, memes. At the turn of the millennium, the internet, that new stage for pop culture, found in Chuck Norris a fertile ground for the creation of a type of hyperbolic humor, transforming him, unexpectedly, into a star for the millennial generation. In the mid-2000s, a website dedicated to collecting hundreds of these hyperboles appeared, satirizing his rudeness, strength, and virility. The digital world, for a moment, held its breath, fearing the hero's reaction to this barrage of jokes about his image. But, to the surprise of many, Chuck Norris not only gave his blessing to the phenomenon, but went further. He published his own book of facts, the official Chuck Norris Fact Book, and, remarkably, he even incorporated some of these facts into his characters and public appearances, embracing the new form of popularity. His last film appearance was in The Expendables 2, 2012, was a perfect tribute to his status. The film, a gathering of action legends orchestrated by Sylvester Stallone, treated the audience to a dialogue that would immediately become classic and representative of the persona that Chuck Norris had built. Sly welcomed him with a phrase that directly evoked the legends that surrounded him. "Base text Chucky helps his wife." "I heard you were bitten by a real snake." Norris's response, delivered with an almost imperceptible smile, sealed the moment with the typical dose of humor and invincibility that characterized him, reaffirming the myth. Bayes texts Chuck he helps his wife. "That's true, but after 5 days of unbearable pain, the snake died." Your list of fictional facts could actually include one that is surprisingly true and shockingly authentic. Chuck Norris suffered 2 heart attacks in less than an hour and, against all odds, survived. It's an event that's so extraordinary that it seems to have been taken directly from one of his famous facts. One Twitter user, with the social network's peculiar wit, managed to summarize the event in a way that resonates with the actor's aura: 2 die of heart attacks while trying to attack Chuck Norris. But in this particular case, hyperbole met reality in a dramatic way. The incident occurred in 2017, when the actor was returning home after participating in a martial arts event in Las Vegas. The truth is that, on that day, the actor's heart stopped twice, a testament to his resilience that goes far beyond the movie screen. Shortly after this terrifying episode, Norris announced his definitive retirement from filmmaking, a gesture that, at first, might have seemed like the end of an era, but which was, in fact, the beginning of a new and deeper battle. He would dedicate himself entirely to caring for Gina, his wife since 1998, reaffirming the commitment he had made years before. Love, this universal and immeasurable force, has proven itself capable of anything, even of appeasing the man who, in the collective imagination and in anecdotes, had the power to bring down a German plane just by pointing his finger and uttering a loud bang. The real life of Chuck Norris, with its challenges and sacrifices, shows that the greatest of all fights is the one fought in the name of affection and family. In the chaotic scenario of the Cold War and social transformations in the United States, the figure of Chuck Norris emerged not only as an actor, but as a symbol of resistance and conservative values, a beacon for many who yearn for stability. His rise was intrinsically linked to the patriotic fervor fueled by the Ronald Reagan administration in the 1980s. The country, which had experienced the counterculture of hippies and the pacifist leadership of Jimmy Carter in the previous decade, was once again feeling the echoes of the fears of the 1950s, with the possibility of a Soviet invasion through the Bering Strait hanging in the air. It was a crucial moment, which called for heroes who would not hesitate to step forward, and Norris, with his unshakable reputation and the image of being able to face an army of communists with his chest open, literally, in scenes from films like U.S.A. Invasion, perfectly embodied this need. He became the personification of the Guardian, the defender of America. This image was built not only by Norris's charisma, but also by the keen business sense of other proud capitalists, such as Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus. The 2 Israeli-born cousins, the masterminds behind Cannon Films, a production company that became a B-movie icon, flooded the shelves of local video stores with a series of action films whose plots were sometimes less relevant than the promise of pure adrenaline. Cannon's philosophy was straightforward and profitable. If you're making American movies with a beginning, middle, and end in a budget of less than $5 million, you'd have to be an idiot to lose money. And the truth is, they were far from idiots. Their acumen in capitalizing on the demand for low-budget, high-impact action films was remarkable. In his first work with Cannon, Norris was able to witness firsthand the monumental disdain the cousins felt for any pretense of narrative or artistic coherence. The film that was eventually released as Braddock, the Super Commando, 1984, was actually the second part of a planned trilogy. However, to optimize costs, all the features were filmed simultaneously. And as the producers considered Braddock the most interesting of the triad, they decided that it should premiere first. The chronological coherence of the story? That was a secondary detail compared to the spectacle of Norris eliminating enemies, or, as the text's narrative itself points out with a touch of irony, if Chuck finished off a rat with his teeth? Logic gave way to visual impact. These films, often with budgets as modest as the depth of their scripts, had a paradoxical effect. They not only cemented the mystique surrounding Norris, but also solidified his image as the lone vigilante, an archetype as laconic as it was efficient. He became the legitimate heir to his great hero, John Wayne, who had played this role unparalleled in cinema, perpetuating the figure of the strong, silent man who solves problems in his own way. Norris's rise, then, was a complex phenomenon that benefited both from the heightened patriotism of the Reagan era and from the shrewdness of producers who knew how to exploit the market niche. It was, in fact, the right time for heroes to take the reins, and Chuck, with his ability to face an army of communists head-on, was ready to assume that role with determination. Meanwhile, Norris's patriotic intentions, however genuine, have not always managed to win over critics or a more diverse audience. In 2011, he was awarded the unflattering title of Worst Actor of the Last 25 Years by the influential website Rotten Tomatoes. The justification, as the website itself pointed out, was linked more to the poor quality of the films in which he acted than to his own performance. But for a man who saw himself as a bulwark in the fight against communism, both on screen and in real life, the opinions of critics seemed to have secondary importance. His transcendence and influence went far beyond the movie theater, reaching a level that few actors can achieve. An entire generation of Romanians, for example, can attest to the impact of his image on their lives. In Unlinked Caligari in his poignant documentary, Chuck Norris vs. Communism, we are transported to one of those stories that surpass the most ingenious and complicated scripts. In the 1980s, under the oppressive Ceausescu regime in Romania, the population had access to only one television channel, which functioned as an arm of the government, broadcasting programs and films only after strict approval or surgical cuts. However, human creativity in circumventing censorship flourished. A black market for video, fueled by illegal tapes, flourished, and through it circulated the thrilling adventures of Norris, Stallone and Van Damme. These films became more than mere entertainment. They were windows into a world of freedom and prosperity that contrasted sharply with the oppressive reality they lived in. These action heroes, who stood up to the ideology that was suffocating the Romanians, served to open the people's eyes to an existence where ration cards did not exist, but rather Ford Mustangs, Coors beer, and the promise of sunny vacations on Venice Beach. The screen became a portal of dreams, a vision of a possible future that fueled hope and silent resistance. Norris's influence, however, extended far beyond mere opposition to ideological communism, branching out deeply into his own political philosophy, which was firmly anchored on the more conservative right of the American spectrum. He did not shy away from confronting, directly and often incisively, any trace of progressivism that he perceived in society. Although the Chun Kuk Do, the martial art he himself developed, was built on a decalogue of noble and altruistic principles, including maxims such as if I have nothing good to say about a person, I will say nothing, and I will dedicate so much time to improving myself that I will have no time to criticize others, in addition to valuing respect for authorities. In practice, the six-time world karate champion did not hesitate to launch virulent criticisms against the figures of authority themselves. The coherence between his words and his actions was sometimes tested. A notable example of this dissonance came during then-President Barack Obama's re-election campaign. In his weekly column for WorldNet Daily, Norris posed provocative rhetorical questions such as, what if the Virgin Mary had depended on Obama's health care? From his digital pulpit, he raised his voice, shouting, will Obama's care become Herod's care for newborns, while fervently defending mandatory prayer in public schools, an issue close to the conservative base. Norris's political intransigence did not spare even figures from his own camp. Even a respected Republican war hero, such as then-Senator John McCain, had to endure Norris's scorn for having supported marriage equality. Chuck, as expected, vehemently opposed it. For him, certain values were non-negotiable, and his stance was always crystal clear, regardless of who was on the other side of the argument, showing a determination that recalled Colonel James Braddock's inflexibility in carrying out his missions. Not surprisingly, Hillary Clinton also failed to gain political approval. Like other dissidents in a Hollywood that was gradually aligning itself with the Democratic Party, Norris, along with personalities such as Jon Voight and Charlie Sheen, chose to endorse and campaign for Donald Trump. This choice, for many, made perfect sense. After all, few Americans could be as obsessed with the idea of a wall on the border with Mexico as the man who, for 9 seasons, patrolled the Texas lands in the iconic series Chuck Norris, the Lawman. This role as the unwavering Texas Ranger not only cemented his enduring popularity throughout the 1990s and 2000s, but also propelled him into a completely different and modern cultural phenomenon, memes. At the turn of the millennium, the internet, that vast and unpredictable new stage for pop culture, found in Chuck Norris a fertile ground for the proliferation of hyperbolic and caricatured humor that, unexpectedly, turned him into a true icon for the millennial generation. In the mid-2000s, a dedicated website began collecting hundreds of these hyperboles, which exaggeratedly mocked his unmatched rudeness, his superhuman strength, and his legendary virility. The digital world, for a brief moment, held its breath, anticipating a possible angry reaction from the hero to this barrage of jokes about his image. But, to everyone's surprise, Chuck Norris not only gave his blessing to the phenomenon, but went further. He published his own book of facts, the official Chuck Norris Fact Book, and, remarkably, he even incorporated some of these hilarious facts into his characters and public appearances, willingly embracing this new and peculiar form of popularity. His last film appearance in The Expendables 2, 2012, conceived by Sylvester Stallone as a grand homage to the icons of action cinema, offered the audience a dialogue that became instantly classic and perfectly encapsulated the invincible persona that Chuck Norris had built over the years. Stallone welcomed him with a line that directly evoked the legends surrounding him, "I heard you were bitten by a real snake." Norris's response, delivered with a barely perceptible smile, sealed the moment with that characteristic dose of dry humor and invincibility that defined him, reaffirming the myth, "It is true, but after 5 days of unbearable pain, the snake died." He was the living legend, interacting with his own mythology. However, the list of fictional facts about Chuck Norris could actually include one event that is surprisingly true and shockingly authentic. Chuck Norris suffered not one, but 2 heart attacks in less than an hour and, against all odds, survived. It is an event that is so extraordinary that it seems to have been taken directly from one of his most famous facts. One Twitter user, with the social network's peculiar wit, managed to summarize the event in a way that perfectly resonates with the actor's aura: 2 die of heart attacks while trying to attack Chuck Norris. But in this particular case, hyperbole met reality in a dramatic way, proving that even the unbeatable Chuck Norris has his own real-world battles. The terrifying incident occurred in 2017, when the actor was returning home after participating in a martial arts event in Las Vegas. The truth is that, on that day, the actor's heart stopped twice, a testament to his resilience that goes far beyond the choreographed scenes in his films and that echoes the bravery he has always demonstrated in characters like J.J. McQuaid. Shortly after this serious health episode, Norris announced his definitive retirement from film. This gesture, at first, could seem like the melancholic end of a glorious era. However, it turned out to be the beginning of a new and, for him, more profound mission. He would dedicate himself entirely to caring for Gina, his wife since 1998, reaffirming the commitment of love and protection that he had made years before, a commitment that proved to be stronger than any movie villain. Love, that universal and immeasurable force, proved capable of anything, even of appeasing the man who, in the collective imagination and in the most famous anecdotes, had the power to bring down a German plane just by pointing his finger and uttering a loud bang. The real life of Chuck Norris, with its challenges and sacrifices, shows that the greatest of all fights is the one fought in the name of affection and family, a narrative that surpasses any Hollywood script.